Doug Wiley with Police Magazine. I'm here with Roy Bethke, a dear friend, the executive director of Below 100. We're here in St. Louis, Missouri at ILEETA. One of the discussions that we've had over the last couple of days, a lot of young people are looking at the law enforcement profession where on any given day, just for doing your job, you could either go to jail or go to the grave. And doing your job within the law and within policy. You could be brought up on charges, you could be sued civilly. We need to figure out a way to have a better strategy and tactics around recruiting and also the retention of our officers. What are your thoughts on some of that?
There's a lot of great conversations happening nationwide about this recruitment retention issue, right? And it would be a lie to think there aren't huge challenges facing the law enforcement profession at the moment. And we have to acknowledge that those things are real and that those pressures actually do exist. And it starts, I think, really with the introduction to the profession conversation, right? At what point in people's lives do they become interested in law enforcement? How does that compare to in the past? And when they become interested, are we doing a good job of actually selling the profession, right? We can't control how we're perceived on social media, and that's a very new dynamic for us. There's a lot of stuff that isn't in our control, but what we do control is that this is an honorable and amazing profession filled with people who want to make a difference and change the world. But yet young people are learning about law enforcement primarily from TV shows or from social media, and they're not learning the reality of what policing is. So how do we build trustworthiness with our communities and attract the right people? The other part of the conversation from a recruitment standpoint, I think, is if we watch recruiting videos that many police departments put out, we're showing all the cool stuff that we do. And listen, some people, some of us, me included, as a former deputy police chief and 28 years at a law enforcement agency just outside Chicago, I got to do some really cool stuff, SWAT and other stuff. But if that's what we're showing people, to get them in the door, to get them to apply, and then when they show up at our agency, we're assigning them to a field training officer, and then we're assigning them to, like in my agency, it would have been 8 years on midnights, before they have a shot to even get off of midnights because of seniority, let alone be on the SWAT team or have a canine. Are we actually selling them the right product, right? And this is hard work, and you know, we've talked about this before, the I got to work weekends conversation, I got to work midnights. Where's the reality of those challenges being discussed with new people that are interested in our profession? And that has to happen. It's still an amazing profession. It's an amazing career choice. I look back at starting in 1988. I can't believe the things I've been able to do, the people I've been able to meet, conversations I've had with you. I mean, I've watched you for years and years and years, and to be sitting here actually having a conversation with you on tape it's awe-inspiring. And this profession is filled with amazing, humble people that want to change the world. So how do we attract more of those people into this profession?
Before we get to the question of retention, because it's very, very important, one of the things that we can do and do better and do more of and do more frequently is work with young people. And you know, we have the opportunity to have a contact. Every officer has the opportunity to have a contact with a young person and do so in a real, meaningful way, one-to-one. Many police officers, SROs, work duty at the football game or the baseball game or work security. But we also have the opportunity to put together, you know, you have police athletic leagues, you have explorer programs, cadet programs. These things not only expose these young people to what law enforcement officers are really like. You know, they're not these terribly mean, awful people, that they're giving, caring, you know, providers. And they get the exposure to that piece, but they also get actual hands-on law enforcement training. And so when they get to the academy, they're so much more advanced and so much more able to come into the job and be ready to go, right?
Yeah, and I love that. So I started my my law enforcement career, my interest as a law enforcement explorer. And I talk about this a lot in some of the leadership classes that I teach. I'm a high school dropout, made some really bad decisions as a young person, had a police officer in my hometown kind of take me under his wing, introduced me to the Explorer program, kind of gave me some direction. And it was interesting. When I got there, I loved what I saw, the people who cared, the cool equipment, the cool tools, and the stuff they got to do. Had it not been for that police officer and that series of contacts with me, and he didn't need to do that stuff, I would have never come into this profession. I didn't have family members that were in law enforcement. I really knew nothing about law enforcement before that happened. I agree with you. I think our need to connect with our communities and need to connect with young people has never been greater than it is today. And I think that's a challenge for us because we rely heavily as a society on social media and this new culture. And with, I think, all the pressure and stress the law enforcement profession is under, we've certainly seen a withdrawal by some officers, a step back of those community contacts. Kind of the theory, if I don't do anything, I can't get in trouble for it. And that's a problem for us, right? Is that's not what we want to do. It's probably not what most officers wanted to do the day they got hired. But that's the circumstance we find ourselves in. So as leaders in this profession, what do we do about it? How do we start to make some progress?
Finally, the other piece of this very difficult puzzle is that we are not addressing the needs of officers, and I'm talking about the mental, emotional, physical well-being of officers in order that they feel cared for, that they feel part of the family again. We've lost a lot of that kind of feeling because agencies are much more prone to throw an officer under the bus for political expediency in the event of a high-profile event. We need to address some of the things that are leading officers to abandon their mission, their chosen profession prematurely. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a hard time. I mean, you take all the things that you said and then you throw pension pressures across the country into this conversation with changing pension systems and the guarantee that you made me, the promise that you made me when I started.
Right.
I'm going to work 30 years and that promise may not exist. That's troubling for us. And we do need to care for our officers much better. And I want to be cautious, though, to not lump everyone into the same pile of bad leadership and bad agencies. You and I both know lots of law enforcement leaders and agencies that are doing it really, really well, really caring for their people. But at some level, many of our agencies have gotten away from the core fundamental of caring for one another. When we have this conversation about us versus them, in the old days, the us versus them was us against the public, and I don't support that conversation. I think it's a terrible conversation to have, but we saw it. Now, the conversation, especially for line-level officers, the us versus them is almost always command versus the line personnel. And that's hugely problematic for us. And we can talk about all different studies, but if your people aren't cared for, if they don't believe in you, if they don't trust you, they're not going to do the work that you need them to do. And some of the research that we've done on the back end of this part of the conversation is that as people get in higher levels in their organizations, they begin to lose their focus on line personnel because they have more strategic and more global things on their mind, generally speaking. When they do that, they think they need to fight the fights that are outside the walls of the police department. But yet when you talk to line personnel about what their struggles are, they're always internal. They haven't changed since the day I started in law enforcement. It's bad communication. I thought this was a bad promotion. I didn't get the chance that I was supposed to have. So if we care for each other inside our buildings, then the officers can care for the community, which is what we need them to do. And they need to be supported as much as they can. The mental health piece, I know you're heavily involved in, I am as well. The number of suicides, which, by the way, counting numbers and statistics is a piece of the puzzle, but it's about the attempts. It's about the people who are seriously ill that need help.
Right.
How do we get them help, right? It's no different than line of duty deaths in the below 100 conversation. Sadly, it's easy to count names on a wall, but how do you impact people and get them to make better decisions? And often, you won't ever hear about the people that you treated correctly or well or cared for because they're not a statistic.
They're the news story that never happened. And that's one of the things about, and I echo your sentiments. I got into this wonderful universe of law enforcement as a police supporter, a civilian supporter of police, almost by accident, and it's been the most wonderful journey I've ever taken in my life, other than perhaps my son and my family. It's a wonderful profession, and once you're exposed to the quality of people that are in law enforcement, like, for example, that are in attendance here at ILETA in St. Louis, I feel wonderful getting up in the morning and doing one little thing that might help an officer through crisis or help an agency through their recruiting and retention crisis. So I want to thank you for everything that you do for law enforcement as a trainer, as a cop, and as just a wonderful human being. Appreciate you.
I appreciate that. Appreciate our friendship.
Doug Wiley with Police Magazine.